The downfall of Yakuza is in full swing. Nagoshi has fled the sinking ship, and Sega, over a series of controversial releases, has essentially killed their one last remaining golden goose in IP, and is now kind of like desperately vying for relevancy. They put like RCG Studio in charge of everything. I think they're working on Street Fighter, Virtua Fighter. They're working on Virtua Fighter. I think they're working on like Yakuza spin-offs. They're making like new Yakuza games. They're doing like all sorts of things over there because for a long time people thought this company could go do no wrong, right? For like a period of about like 8 years, RCG was basically keeping Sega afloat. This is a company that people thought was, just endlessly entertaining. People were obsessed with Yakuza. They worshiped Yakuza. They thought Yakuza was the savior of video games. Yakuza 0 was the best thing they played that year. It was just a gigantic cult. Okay, Yakuza was already well into free fall by the time it became popular. And by the time Nagoshi left, by the time that Nagoshi left to make the exact same game for another studio, Sega was already seeing massive declines in sales and relevancy, and it was because of the poor decisions they made. It was because of games like Yakuza 6, failing to close out Kuryu's story satisfactorily. You have issues like the endless spin-offs that went nowhere. You have issues with Ichiban not becoming a relevant protagonist. You have like these problems with like their general structure and vibe and just endless repetition. It is embarrassing how bad modern Yakuza has become. It's almost a joke, honestly. Like, what do you mean I'm LARPing as a pirate in Hawaii? It's like, that was the last game. Okay, the entire concept is cringe, but that's really seriously what they came up with and really should be mocked and derided by everyone, okay? Like, these games were, like, weirdly pro-sex worker. They were weirdly pro-troon, weirdly pro, like, all sorts of, like, degeneracy. Okay, like, Yakuza fell off the deep end a long time ago. I was going on record saying it's probably the most woke Japanese RPG series there is at this stage, because you openly have like your protagonist like shilling for like cross-dressers and stuff like that. It was disgusting. So what's happened now is, now that Yakuza has been ported over to Nintendo consoles, there's no incentive to keep up the facade. Okay, now that it's coming to Nintendo and that they've made some like Nintendo exclusive releases, now it's the time to like downplay Yakuza. It's the time to hate Yakuza. It's the time to just let it die. Because, like, if it's not a PlayStation exclusive, if it's on Nintendo hardware, there's no reason to keep shilling it. And that's basically what's slowly happened, okay? Is that this was a PlayStation exclusive franchise that went multi-plat, and it's slowly been losing relevancy ever since. Because the only reason this series had any momentum behind it at all was because of the PlayStation exclusivity. Now that it doesn't have that, Sony fans don't have the motivation to like, come to its defense whenever they do something ridiculous. And that's led to like several controversies kind of propping up over the past several years. When it comes to recasts, when it comes to like cut content, when it comes to like woke localization changes, all of which are things that would have gone under the radar back in the day. Now, people are seeing these things and they're like freaking out about them, and really getting uppity and really starting to acknowledge that like this game looks like a complete mess. Okay, it is a masterpiece. Okay, like Yakuza 3 was already like a pretty controversial Yakuza game to begin with. It was considered the worst one for a very long time. I don't know if it still is, but like the fact of the matter is that they massively cut down the game. They failed to really expand on it in any meaningful way, and it seems like they've made a lot of changes that like really alienate a lot of hardcore fans. And because it's not a PlayStation exclusive, this stuff isn't being brushed under the rug like it would have been back in Yakuza 6, where like that one was entirely about how Kuryu, where you only played as Kuryu and you only had like 100 sub stories and you had this very disappointing, like, anticlimactic, like, ending to his storyline. Like, that's you don't have that anymore, right? Yakuza 3 is available on everything, and as a result, no fanboy has any motivation to try and, like, downplay what's happening now. Is that Yakuza is in free fall, and there's no real salvaging it. Like, these guys put out way too many games way too quickly, all of them, like, pretty much the same, and didn't really bring in a lot of people. You know, in the peak of its relevancy with the release of Yakuza 0, they didn't learn from it, you know? Like, they did this thing where they released Yakuza 0. It became popular internationally, right? It was a huge hit everywhere. You know, they did Yakuza 0, and they're just like, okay, we're going to do Yakuza 6. We're going to, like, finish Kuryu's story, and then we're going to move on, okay? That seems to make sense. But what they did was that they put out games like Kiwami 1 and Kiwami 2, 7. Like, basically, they put out a bunch of games that jumped around the timeline, and then they kept announcing whenever they were porting other games to other platforms. Like, I remember it was a big deal when, like, you know, the series was ported to Xbox, and then they, like, made several announcements for Xbox, and then they did the same thing for Nintendo, and it's like, why the hell would I get excited about playing Kiwami 1 on Nintendo Switch when I've already played it on Xbox and hated it, right? Like, why exactly would I do that, right? And, you know, they wouldn't do any of the new games, you know. They wouldn't, like, we still don't have Yakuza 7 on Nintendo Switch 2, right? Like, and as a result of that, you know, the next major Yakuza release we get is almost definitely going to be a remake. So you have nobody in the Nintendo community that's excited for, like, the future of the franchise, right? So, like, Yakuza fans are doing this thing where they're, like, you know, not getting excited about games they've already played, while Nintendo fans are, like, getting upset about, like, the fact that, like, you know, you have, like, decades worth of, like, continuity lockout. You don't know who the characters are, you don't know the setting, and you don't need to know for Yakuza, but, like, the way it presents itself, like, it's very easy to assume that, like, you kind of do, considering the nature of it. So a lot of people just don't really feel the need to get into these kind of games. Like, Yakuza 0 on Switch 2 would have been, like, a big entry-level point for this company and this brand, but, like, they made a lot of controversial decisions with it. Like, they did retcon some stuff. They did do some things differently. They ruined certain things. And a lot of people in the community are not all that happy about it. You know, it's just embarrassing what we're seeing from the studio at this point. And at this stage, this you know, this has been going on for years, right? You know, in my mind, the series has been going downhill since, like, Yakuza 5. But in my mind, this is something that's been, like, on the way for years. Okay, like, it just seems like to me that, like, even though the backlash is only getting started now, this is something that's been a problem for a long, long time, is that these games are too repetitive. They are badly written. They don't do a whole lot with the characters. They've never innovated on the concept. Like, it's something that a lot of people in the community really need to accept, is that these games, as unique as they are, could be a lot better. You know, they could have better combat mechanics. They could have better pacing. They could have better storylines. But instead, they just kind of do this thing where they do the same thing over and over again. And we're at the stage now where people who started with 0 are finally waking up and starting to see it. You know, that's the reality of where we're at when it comes to Yakuza games, is that the mask is off, and people now know what these games and developers actually are.